This time, and we ask that you bless it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. So we'll start with a quick recap. In chapters 32 through 37, we're introduced to Elihu, and we spent some time discussing it on Sunday, kind of the characteristics of Elihu, what he brings to the book, and what is unique, about the character of Elihu and his take. So just to recap in general, what was different about Elihu and the way that he began his message? He began his argument to Job. For anybody that might recall or have your own words about it, what was different?
He puts himself on the same playing field. Like he relates to Job in that I'm a sinner, you're a sinner, and he kind of
Right.
goes in as we're equals. I'm not any better than you, and I'm not angry at you for that. Whereas the other guys kind of came in just throwing judgment right off the bat.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. He was immediately tried to be very human, connected, state that there's not a difference between them in the eyes of the Creator. He had nothing special other than what was given to him by the Creator. And then, his argument. What was different about his argument than the others? What did he spend a lot of time trying to, get Job to realize? Well, versus the others who came in judgment of past, what was Elihu really focusing on?
He took time to relate to him and show that he understood what Job was saying.
Right? So absolutely, he definitely does try to relate and put some understanding between him. And I guess, I'll ask you more specifically so we understand. The others immediately started presenting facts, right, about, Job's specific sins. Elihu, he focused on one, on really just one. What does anybody recall what that is, or what that was?
His righteousness?
Right. Yeah, he really spent almost all of his time to say, Job, you're telling us that you are without blame, you're innocent, everything that you've done, you don't understand how and why this could even happen to you. And then that one fact, right, instead of the others who said, well, you must have had some other sins that happened in your life, or your kids must have had some sins, or in general, related a lot of things to the past. Elihu was very focused on, Job, your failure is to not realize you're questioning God right now. And to question God and to ask, why or how could this happen to you? Or even to present that you're blameless, in any way before God is part of the problem, because he's setting the stage here. He's setting the stage for God to come in this argument that we're going to, dive into. So he spends a lot of time saying, where the others focused on specific sins, things that, Job was not realizing, that he was trying to counter back and forth, he didn't spend any time there, just really only focused on his words of kind of self-righteousness, to say, that is your problem. Your rebellion before God, you're kind of clapping in God's face, and you can't begin to understand his plan at all. You can't understand even the slightest bit. He spent a lot of time in 37 and 38 talking about the power of God and who he was, to put that in front of Job. So that's where we're at, and we ended kind of quickly. I didn't spend a lot of time on 37 and 38 because today, obviously, we really get, a really powerful answer to who is God, what is God, what is, to even ponder that question. And, we find, I would fail to say, Brian's done such a good job of kind of explaining his thoughts. We want us to look at this book as kind of a play, kind of a dramatic, epic, play or poem. Well, right now, in chapter 38, the second main character burst onto the scene, right? Job's been, we see God right away, we see God and Satan, and then he goes away, for a long time. It leaves Job just searching for answers. But he's back, and he's back in a big way. So, before we, get all the way started, and kind of discussing it, in some places in this class, obviously we haven't spent a lot of time in the text of just reading. But the more that I, read this week, chapters 38 and 39, they alone just give you such clarity to what, we'll discuss. And any words that I have to say about it later, or any words that any of us had to say, you can almost feel how insignificant they are, if you really read 38 and 39. So we're going to spend a little time just reading. We'll read chapter 38, and starting there, it says, "Then Jehovah answered Job out of the tempest. He said, 'Who is this who darkens deliberations with words that lack knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you have understanding. Who marked off its dimensions? Tell me if you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God sang for joy, who knit the sea together behind doors? Who brought it forth gushing from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in dark mist, when I fixed limits for it and set its bolted doors, and said, this far you may come and no farther. Here is where your proud waves will break. Have you ever given orders to the morning, or shown the dawn its place, that it might take the earth by its edges, like a huge tablecloth, and shake the wicked out of it? The earth takes shape like clay under a seal. Its features stand out like those of a garment. The wicked are denied their light. Their upraised arm is broken. Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been shown to you? Have you seen the gates of the shadow of death? Have you contemplated the underworld's vast expanse? Tell me if you know all this. What is the way to the dwelling place of light? And where does darkness reside? Can you take them to their places? Do you know the paths to their dwellings? Surely you know, for you were already born. The number of your days is so large. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or seen the storehouses of the hail, that I reserve for times of trouble, for the day of war and battle? What is the way to the place from where the west wind is dispersed, or the place from where the east wind is scattered over the earth? So we'll stop there for just a little bit. And as you contemplate those words, as we think about tonight, what I want us to think about is how and why we can have confidence in God and in the Lord. Because, that's where, if you think about Job right now, that's where he got a little bit lost, a little bit off, right? And you understand why, like Randy pointed out last time, you can't, do you fault Job for grasping, for wondering why and how, and can someone just give me an answer? And we've all had times like that, right? That's when I think about practical applications to us today, obviously there's so many about, specific trials, but if you just, maybe trivialize it a little bit and think about all the minor cares and things of this world that we get wrapped up in, right? Sometimes, it's a little easy to kind of forget that, we are children of a Creator who has it all figured out, all within His hands, all within His grasp. And so sometimes we just need to trust. Just trust. And that's it. Just simply, that's it. Not try to understand, not try to give an answer, not try to figure it out, not all of those things that we try to do, right? Sometimes we just have to trust it, and I think that gets hard. That gets hard in everyday life. I think we probably all have like these small and minor situations where you're just like having a hard time trusting someone or something, right? If it's you're working on you got a project at the house and so-and-so says, hey, I'll do this, and I'll do this, and I'll do this, and it'll look like this, right? Sometimes you're like, well, that sounds great, but I really want to know exactly how you're going to do it, when you're going to be here, and how you're going to do it, and explain all that to me. Or sometimes, like I know in my life, I'll say, Nikki, I'll do this and this and this, and she'll be like, oh, well, okay, are you sure? Are you sure you're going to do that? I'm like, just trust me, right? Just trust me. And I wish I could say every time, I'd get it done exactly. But there's other times where I didn't, right? And she may have a lot of anxiety and a lot of worry about getting it done right. And it's things maybe she couldn't control at all, And you have to trust. You have to trust at those times. And so, like I said, what I want to spend time is looking at the Lord's words, looking at what He says and how they can empower us to be the type of people that have confidence in Him just because of who He is only. Which is enough. It is enough. When you think what He did for us, then it puts it way over the top. But just someone to be, for us to think about the presence of God and who He is, is enough for us to be confident. So, I know I've done a lot of talking, not so many questions. Eric?
Like you said, 38, 39, I guess even 40. It's amazing, the words. But, leading up to this, we hear the back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then, in the classroom or here in our church, all of us are dealing with something. And some of us are dealing with some really dark stuff. And I typically am not so bold to question God. At least I don't verbalize it. I probably do mentally sometimes. To really question God. And I think there's some justification for that we see in the Psalms of asking God questions. I tend not to do that. I think there's a right way to do that. But if you just read 2 verses only, you got all this heavy stuff, and I'm not minimizing anything someone may have heavy going on. And it may be minor, we're blowing it up. But 2 verses, number 3, dress for action, that'll read ESV. Dress for action like a man. All right, that's already really powerful right there. I'll question you, you make it known to me. And then this one simple sentence is enough. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? It's being sarcastic right there, the mic drop right there, right?
Right.
So where were you when and I was listening to this today, and for those of you who read or listen to the Bible, I don't know if any of y'all do NIV UK, but it's really good. Listen to this chapter.
Yeah.
The NIV UK version. The guy's got a really good voice.
Yeah.
You know me, I'm all in the drama and movies.
Yeah, I do.
So he's got a really good voice, and when he starts speaking for God, you can it's really neat.
No, well, it is. I know you're being sarcastic about the movie situation, but I also know that I almost brought a speaker in here and played those in the George Jones, or not George, whatever his name is, the guy,
Josh had mentioned
Mufasa, whatever his name is. That
Josh
guy.
had mentioned, he said, I think Josh Lake a long time ago said he listened to NIV UK, and I started listening to it.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
No, it's good. And like I said, you probably wouldn't ask Eric for recommendations on movies to watch, but that recommendation is great. Because it's happened to me multiple times this week to actually just sit back and listen to these verses and just find yourself like you just get smaller and smaller and smaller. And then you're just like, is it okay for me to think or keep going? Do those things. And that part's great. And we're going to spend, like I said, we're going to dig some more into it, but just to start there. And then to think about, not only that, you talk about bursting on the scene, he says he answers him out of the tempest, right? So what's that mean right away? What's God's presence like immediately? Is it felt? Who knows what a tempest is?
It's like a whirlwind.
Right? Whirlwind, storm. And is this the only time we read about God and the tempest or whirlwind or any of that? Is it? No. No, right? Many times in the Old Testament, God's presence was noted through a whirlwind. cloud of fire. I mean, you think about this, the Israelites in the desert, right? You know, moving along and watching that cloud. You think about, you know, many different times that we see God, right? His presence is known right away. And so you just think about that scene real quick, right? Because this scene is interesting enough to think about these four friends who've been, you know, sitting around for weeks talking and mourning and anguish and little things we know about it now for that scene to be set, because it's Elihu stops, right? He stops speaking, and then right away, here comes God. And so, you know, setting the stage that you wanted an answer, Job, and here I am. Here I am to, in all of my glory, you know, to give you that answer. And then you start, you know, deconstructing some of the things that we read there, right? When you talk about laying the foundations, right? For those of you that are real, you know, into building those types of things and, you know, making sure things are, you know, square and even, you know, there's those of us in this room that are like really good at it, and those of us that would never even really try it, right? They don't really, you know, let's say they're good at it or not good at it. But for those of us that are good at it, you think about how hard it is to do something the scale of a, you know, building, right? Just a building. Not easy. Not easy. I wouldn't even begin to contemplate it. And as Eric said, you think about it, God setting out his measuring line across the entire earth. The whole expanse. You know, that right there. You know, and that's something they would know right at that time. At that time of the world, it's not as much anymore, right? But when you lay the foundation, in that time, oftentimes there were ceremonies, you know, festivals, you know, to celebrate, because it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to make sure that your foundation was laid properly. It took care, work, you know, and those things to do. And so they're all going to relate, you know, and Job's going to relate to how hard that is to even think about it, how much. And now, you know, he's talking to the one who's squared it all from the beginning. And so it's a, you know, that's a real interesting statement, you know, to think. And then it just kind of sets the stage for the rest of the commentary. And again, I think the first, you know, 20 verses or so are really spent to focus on us admiring, or Job admiring, the sheer power, the sheer wisdom of the Creator, right? He spends a lot of time really focusing there. God wanting him to just grasp at straws for anything. And so you go on and you think about, you know, verses 8 through 11. You know, who knit the sea together behind the doors? Who brought it forth, gushing from the womb? When I made the cloud its garments and wrapped it in its dark mist. You know, for those of us who, you know, sometimes you just go to the ocean, right? When you go to the ocean, you get this one picture of the sea, right? You just get this one view. And millions and millions and millions and millions of people go to the ocean just for that. Just for that, to get that one view. But when you think about what he's talking about, the sea, and everything within the sea, and all of the life, you know, you're talking about an incredibly complex, a system that still today we haven't discovered. We've discovered less of it than we know, right? We've explored less of the ocean than we've been able to look into. And so, you know, we just go to the ocean, right, for a little glimpse of, you know, peace and, you know, sometimes to settle us. And yet Job's talking to the person who's done all, you know, where the waters come from, all the creatures inside of it, everything that you can possibly think about. He's the one who set it loose, right? And, you know, that's when you think about releasing the powers of the ocean, you know, sometimes I thought over at Teach today, do we have to kind of labor all these words because we all know how powerful God is? But when you think about just the power of the sea, right? We've all been through different parts, you know, and some of us have been in, much worse situations where you've had encounters with floods or storms or things that cause destruction, to our lives. And Brian talked about some things like that. And how destructive they can be. And yet you've got, God here saying, I'm the one who turns it off and on. And so that's a really powerful statement. And then he moves on, right, to the light in verses 12 to 15. Saying, have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place? The very first thing I think about there too is how many people are who love to watch the sunrise and the sunset. They're just captivated by it. And he kind of sets that in motion for Job to say, have you ever given that order? Have you ever been the one to bring it up or put it down? And then he focuses there a little bit, right? And I think there's something to take out of those few verses. When he says, the wicked are denied their light, and their upraised arm is broken. So if you think about that verse and those words compared to this story, why is that important call out there to Job? Why would that specifically be something that Job would be really interested in if you think about the last 30 verses? Why do you think God spends any time talking about that? It's a little bit different, right? I mean, who's he talking about? Right there in verse 15, the wicked are denied their light, their upraised arm is broken. Why would that be important to Job in the context of the book?
Well, God's in control, and He knows how to handle the situation. He knows how to and will handle the wicked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to Job, right? Because Job has spent some time questioning he's compared himself to all of those around the world who are wicked, who are, committing sin, who are disregarding, everything that Job holds sacred, right? Job, we know, he values immensely, his relationship with God and what he needs to do to be righteous. And in some ways, he's kind of at some points thrown his hands up to say, and here, look at everybody else. Look at the wicked. And in definitely some tones of, and I think, we can interpret there because as we learn more about God's response to him, he feels that leave the wicked to me. And that's an important thought, to realize, put in context with Job what God's trying to say to him is, that's a question we can often ask ourselves, right? It's a common question, right? But how many times do we find ourselves frustrated, right? Because you look to your left or you look to your right and you see someone who has total disregard for things that are valuable to you. Whatever that may be. I think for us in this room, we got a real common, something we can rely on, right? We try to live by God's instruction, be the type of people who show God's love to others. And I don't know about you, but it's not always easy for me when I come into contact with someone who's got no bit of Jesus' heart shining through. Someone who's all about themselves, who really, really, has more or less found success through bending parts of this world to their way, and kind of just abandoning, everything we hold true. Sometimes that's hard for me, to look at their success or things that we have, in this life and think, does he not see this? And here I am trying to do everything I can do right, that happens. That's a common thing to think about, and just a reminder for us is let's not get ourselves too far down the way of comparison or worrying about God taking care of those who aren't following his way or those who kind of are showing disregard. It's just more for us to know and understand we've got our place and he's got his, and trust that he's taking care of it. So any thoughts? Any thoughts there about any of the first, 15 verses and God as an all-wise, all-powerful creator?
Thinking about Job and his friends and their kind of, we've already touched on, they're seeking answers, really nothing else other than that. And that's all they want at the end of the day is just, I want my questions answered. I want to know why this is happening, all this stuff. So when he talks about light and it's withheld from the wicked, Ecclesiastes talks about wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness, kind of comparing light to wisdom. And it kind of makes me think of, here's Job and his friends, people that I would assume to be fairly smart, fairly enlightened, quote unquote, in human terms, and they're kind of trying to reason this out. They're trying to come to an answer based on the information they have, and then God shows up and he immediately, there's a complete paradigm shift. You don't have to work with just your little paltry bits of wisdom. I created light. I moved you're talking about, I laid the foundations of the earth, that kind of stuff. And so, to me, putting myself in their shoes, it would be incredibly comforting to know that I don't have to doubt or question what he is about to say. When he answers me, I can be 100% certain that is the correct answer, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think absolutely. That's right away, it should give them some comfort. And as I said, it should give all of us confidence, right? To know when you're talking to, someone who has this amount of power and who's hearing you and who's talking to you, yeah, it should provide a great amount of comfort. And the grasping and trying to answer the question starts to become way, way less important. Just knowing that you're, with someone who has the answer. Any other thoughts?
Many times we want to know answers, like they wanted to know answers. So when you really think about it, what difference does it make as to why?
Mm-hmm.
It happened, it's going to happen, and knowing why is really, I don't say that like it's easy. I'm just saying I don't think that many times the answer is necessary.
Yeah, well, no, that's absolutely right, because as we get to the end of the verse here, right, there's no explanation. Job, you did this, and so that's why I let that happen. There is none of that. And absolutely, I think that is why he's explaining in these words for us. It's not for us to think about. It's not for us to... And I think Eric's point is right. It's not that you won't want to search the scriptures and ask God why and want to understand further, because of course we have understanding. But, in years ago I taught this class with Paul Cook, and I think he took that from Jim Ward, and I guess they took it from someone else, and it's always stuck with me, right? A lot of Job's questioning and his friends answering, think in comparison to whittling on God's end of the stick, right? I don't know if you guys have ever heard that expression, but that's, you found yourself in the wrong spot. You're whittling on God's end of the stick, right? You don't need to ponder and think about those types of questions. Don't concern yourself with it, right? Because what you know is God has you, God's taking care of you, He's going to provide for you, and ultimately He's made the way that if you found your way off of, He's made the way back for you already. So for us to spend time searching for all these answers and trying to understand, it's just ultimately, all lost.
Yeah, in a sense, God's saying, yeah, you're right, he didn't answer indirectly why this happened.
Right.
But in a sense, God's saying, well, your answer is to just consider who I am.
Right. Yeah.
And that'll...
Consider who I
that'll
am.
help.
Yeah, right. And ultimately, not to steal Brian's thunder, so I won't do that too much. But, it's the truth. He doesn't, as he clears things with Job in 40, 41, 42, he definitely doesn't necessarily settle how and why, just other than the fact that, he has things worked out. And we know that he does. So, as we continue to move on, verses, 16 through 24, he kind of, for those of you that are into different things like outer space and you look up at the stars and those are real moments for you that you can connect to, it's just another example of how and what, a majestic creator. You look up at the skies and he set those things in order, right? Sometimes we, I don't know if you ever talk about, the constellations and, these things like there's something that man figured out, right? Or at least I don't know if you feel that way. Sometimes you read and study about those things, but ultimately, here's God setting those things in place and saying, I'm the one who has put the stars in order and gave all of it a purpose and all of it a meaning. And there's people who spend a lot of time throughout the last 1,000 of years trying to understand it, and we still know so very little.
I think it's a temptation for us to stare at a painting and be prideful in our interpretation of it because we are so smart and this is how I feel when I look at it and this is what I think the artist is trying, but there's never going to be a better meaning put to something than what the artist initially intended. And we're, and I think that's kind of where what we're looking at here. God is explaining to Job, it's not that you're searching for meaning. I put meaning into this. And it's probably even appropriate the whirlwind because, it is overwhelming. God is overwhelming, and he just explains why he is, given what he created. And so we read through all that, and it's just unbelievable and overwhelming to us. Our brains can't hold what he has to deal with. And Job is, I think, trying to make this interpretation, and I think pride is starting to seep in because he was righteous and he thinks he knows, but God is saying, look, I've got more things going on than your brain can even possibly fathom.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think that puts a good cap on this part of the discussion. It's exactly right. He for all your questions, you can't think about the sheer amount of volume of things that I'm responsible for, that I'm, have given and am considering and thinking about. Those two things are just not the same. I completely agree. So then we move on to, kind of the second real theme of, ideas behind God's dialogue with Job, which is, really captured by the fact that not only is he all wise and all powerful, he's all caring. We'll read some verses here, and it talks about how he's got all of creation in his mind at all times, and he's thinking about them, caring for them, and he asks Job many, many questions. So the next set of verses, really want to think about, we've got confidence, God, because he's all wise and all powerful, but then also because he truly cares for us. He cares for us just like he cares for the creatures that we'll read about. And so we'll keep going there, and he says, a little further down, we'll start in verse 36. He says, who imparted wisdom to the Evis? Who gave understanding to the rooster? Who has the wisdom to measure the clouds? Who can tip over the water jars of the heavens? When the dust fuses into lumps and the clods of the earth stick together, do you hunt the prey for the lioness and satisfy the hunger of her whelps when they crouch in their dens or lie in ambush in a thicket? Who provides the food for the raven when its young cry out to God and wander around without food? Do you know the time when the mountain goats give birth? Do you watch when the doe bears her fawn? Do you count the months until they bear their young? Do you know the time they give birth? They crouch down and bring forth their young. Their labor pains are ended. Their young thrive and grow strong in the wilds. They leave and do the shouts. He ranges the hills as his pastures and searches for any green plant. Will the wild ox be willing to serve you? Will he stay by your manger at night? Can you hold him to the furrow with a harness? Will he plow the valleys for you? Will you rely on him because of his great strength? Will you assign your heavy work to him? Can you trust him to bring you your grain and gather it to your threshing floors? The wings of the ostrich flap joyfully, though her pinions lack feathers. She lays her eggs on the ground and lets them warm in the sand, unmindful that a foot may crush them and a wild beast may trample them. She treats her young harshly as though they were not her own, not fearful that her labor may have been in vain. For God did not endow her with wisdom or give her a portion of the understanding, yet when she spreads her feathers, she laughs at the horse and rider. So there's more there that he talks about. But I hope you understand now kind of why I think we're shifting and where God's focus is going. It's not necessarily now just these questions of, do you know who I am? Do you know all these things that I've done, or all the wondrous works that you can't understand? These are things that he can understand, right? You know, he knows, right, that God's saying, who provides for the lions and the ravens? You know, who is the one who, you know, the ostrich, the example of the ostrich, to think about, you know, who is the creator that, you know, not only the ostrich, right, is known, right, to not have this, you know, great wisdom at all. You know, she leaves her young. She, you know, really has no regard. But yet, right, that the young prosper, right? Because of who? Because of God, right? That's his plan. He set that. Whether he gave the ostrich wisdom or not, right? He knows and cares for that offspring. The ostrich just didn't, you know, go by the wayside, right? And not all these years later somehow find itself here. That's for a reason. The purpose is because God cares about all of his creation. And if he cares about that and those creatures, how much more does he care for us who's made in his image? You know, and I think that's, without saying it, and he never really, you know, says some of, you know, the things we read, right, later in the New Testament that talk about, you know, if I care for the birds, if I care for the flowers, surely I'll care for you. Right here, he just kind of ends that statement to say, you know, that is what it is. If I care for all of them, we can infer, I'm sure Job infers, right, that he's going to care for Job. And, you know, that's not only to think about the ostrich in the way of caring, but also to look back at his wisdom too, right? Because then he points out to say, but it's not without a purpose, right? The ostrich looks at the horse and the rider and laughs because of its glorious speed. Everything was still designed with an intention and a purpose. And he's there to give it purpose, but also to care for it. So any thoughts there about, you know, those verses, you know, my thoughts on why and how we can have confidence in God taking care of us? Any other thoughts? Okay, well, good.
Nick,
Yeah.
you know, our society where we live, it's so easy to get distracted by whatever. We all have our own distractions and things that take our minds in all kinds of places, but this God and creation and nature, you know, those are the things hopefully that we draw back to and take a lot of courage, a lot of comfort, some explanation, even though we can't comprehend it fully. We're not even close to. But like you said, that God is in control. No matter if we are going through trials like Job, or everything's okay for a period. I mean, these are the things that we have to take time, meditate on, and think on, or we just wake up and we're, you know, so many years down the road,
Right.
and not giving much thought to God and his precepts, and, you know, try to understand him better as he's laying out here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just a good reminder as we're given here. If we get caught up in the things of this world or the day-to-day, and as I've tried to say tonight, and Randy puts it good, all we have to do is stop and look around and consider some of those things that God's done. You know, this creation, you know, the wonders that we see in nature, even to the smallest extent, where we can find God and then restore, you know, back to a clear and a centered focus, you know, that to not get dragged down in worrying about the questions of the world. It's a really good point. And so we'll read there just quickly, you know, Job's answer. goes to say, shall the one who raises frivolous objections contend with the Almighty? Let him who instruct God now give an answer. Then Job answered by saying, I am insignificant. How can I answer you? I put my hand over my mouth. I have spoken once, but I cannot answer. Twice, but I will say nothing more. And I think that puts a really good cap on what any of us would be in that situation. Give us that answer. So there's no class on Sunday. I know the schedule might have said for those of you who haven't, there's no class in this room on Sunday because it will be used for VBS. So we won't meet here. We'll see you guys the Wednesday after. Thank you.